3 weeks before our wedding, Noelle disappeared. She did not leave during an argument. She did not take all her clothes. She did not even cancel the florist. She left one handwritten note on the kitchen table beneath the seating chart for our reception. Please don't look for me. One day, you'll understand. For 5 years, I believed that sentence meant she had chosen another man. I was wrong. The truth was worse because part of it had been sitting in front of me the entire time. Noelle was supposed to meet me at the county clerk's office at 11:30 that Friday morning. We needed one final document for the marriage license, and she had texted me at 9:08 saying she was leaving the photography studio. At 11:46, I called her. No answer. At noon, I told myself she had lost track of time. Noelle could spend 20 minutes photographing the reflection of a traffic light in a puddle and call it work. At 12:23, I called again. Her phone went straight to voicemail. By 1 o'clock, I was angry. By 2 o'clock, I was afraid. When I got home, the front door was unlocked. Her camera bag was gone. So were 2 pairs of jeans, her black coat, and the old canvas suitcase she used when she did not want to check luggage. Her wedding dress was still hanging in the guest room closet. That detail kept me from understanding what had happened. People do not abandon a wedding dress unless they plan to come back. At least that was what I told myself. The note was written on the back of a catering invoice. No greeting, no apology. Just those 2 lines. Please don't look for me. One day you'll understand. I read them until the ink blurred. Then I called her parents. Her mother, Darlene, answered on the second ring. Caleb? Is Noelle there? There was a pause long enough to become an answer. No. Have you spoken to her? Another pause. She said she needed space. When? Last night. I gripped the edge of the table. And you didn't call me? She asked us not to interfere. We're getting married in 3 weeks. Darlene started crying, not loudly. Noelle's mother never did anything loudly. She sounded scared, she said. Scared of what? I don't know. That was the first lie I was given. I did not know it then. My name is Caleb Vaughn. I was 34 when Noelle left. I worked as a structural engineer for a mid-sized construction firm in Raleigh, North Carolina. My days were spent calculating weight, stress, movement, and failure. I knew how much pressure concrete could hold before it cracked. I knew how wind moved across steel. I knew small weaknesses could stay invisible for years until one ordinary day revealed them. I had not known that about people. Noelle Mercer was 31. She photographed weddings, families, small businesses, and occasionally old buildings that nobody else thought were worth saving. We met when my company was restoring a historic theater in Durham. She had been hired to document the renovation. On the first day, she climbed past a safety barrier to photograph sunlight coming through a broken ceiling. I told her she could have been hurt. She told me I looked like a man who had never done anything simply because it was beautiful. I disliked her for almost 6 minutes. Then she smiled. We were together 4 years. She moved into my townhouse after 18 months. She filled the spare room with camera equipment, rolls of paper, batteries, and boxes of prints she promised to organize later. She never did. Noelle left photographs everywhere. On the refrigerator, inside books, tucked behind the bathroom mirror. Sometimes I found pictures of myself I had not known she had taken. Me asleep on the couch. Me washing the car. Me laughing with my sister's children at Thanksgiving. You look most like yourself when you don't know I'm watching, she once said. For years, I thought that was romantic. After she disappeared, it sounded different. The police took a report. But Noelle was an adult. Her passport was gone. Her car had been found at the train station with no damage. There was no blood, no struggle, no sign she had been forced to leave. She planned this, the officer told me. I hated him for saying it. My friends looked for another explanation. Maybe she had panicked about marriage. Maybe she had gone through a breakdown. Maybe there was someone else. That last possibility became the easiest one to live with. Pain needs a shape. An affair gave mine one. I searched her email, old invoices, social media messages, and client calendars. I called photographers she had worked with. I contacted hotels near every place she had recently visited. Nothing. Her business account had been nearly emptied the morning she left. $4,800. Enough to disappear for a while. Not enough to start over forever. The wedding collapsed in slow, humiliating pieces. I called the venue. My sister canceled the hotel rooms. My mother returned unopened decorations to a rental company. The bakery refunded half the cake deposit. Guests sent careful messages that all sounded the same. Thinking of you. Nobody knew what to say to a man whose fiancée vanished without dying. There was no funeral, no body, no acceptable period for mourning, just absence. On what should have been our wedding day, I drove to the lake where Noelle and I had planned to hold the ceremony. The chairs were gone. The arch had never been delivered. A family was having a picnic near the water. I sat in my truck for almost an hour. Then I opened the glove compartment and found a photograph. Noelle had taken it 2 months earlier. I was standing outside our townhouse holding a ladder, looking irritated because she had asked me to stop working and smile. On the back, she had written, "You always think the structure is the whole story." I kept that photograph. I do not know why. Maybe because it was proof she had known she was leaving while I was still discussing table linens. The first year was the worst. I slept badly, worked too much, avoided restaurants where we had eaten together. I stopped answering questions from people who asked whether I had heard from her. The answer was always no. In the second year, I changed jobs. In the third, I moved to Charlotte. In the fourth, I stopped checking her name online. By the fifth, Noelle had become something I could carry without dropping everything else. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon in October, a receptionist called my office and said a lawyer named Miriam Vale was downstairs asking to speak with me. I almost refused. Then the receptionist added, "She says it concerns Noelle Mercer." I had not heard that name spoken aloud in months. Miriam was waiting in the conference room with a narrow cardboard box on the table. She looked to be in her 60s, dressed plainly, with tired eyes and a black folder tucked beneath one arm. I sat across from her. "Where is Noelle?" Miriam did not soften the answer. "She died 12 days ago." The room stayed perfectly still. I heard the air vent above us, a car horn from the street below, my own breath. How? Complications from an untreated heart condition. I stared at her. Noelle did not have a heart condition. Miriam held my gaze. "Yes," she said quietly. She did. Then she pushed the cardboard box toward me. "She left this for you." On top was her old camera. Underneath it was a hospital wristband, a stack of undeveloped film, and a sealed envelope with my name written across the front. The handwriting was hers. The same handwriting from the note she left on our kitchen table. I opened the envelope. The first sentence said, "Caleb, before you hate me again, you need to know why I made everyone lie to you." I read Noelle's letter in the conference room, while Miriam Vale sat across from me with both hands folded over her black folder. The first page was dated 6 days before Noelle died. Her handwriting was less steady than I remembered. Caleb, before you hate me again, you need to know why I made everyone lie to you. I stopped there. Everyone? I asked. Miriam looked down. Her parents knew part of it. The words landed harder than I expected. Darlene's pauses on the phone, the way she said Noelle sounded scared, the way neither parent came to see me after the wedding was canceled. They had not been confused. They had been following instructions. I turned back to the letter. Noelle wrote that 3 months before our wedding, she had collapsed during a photography job in Wilmington. She told me that trip had gone well. She came home sunburned, tired, and carrying a paper bag of saltwater taffy. What she did not tell me was that she spent the night in an emergency room. Doctors found a congenital heart defect that had gone undetected for years. It could be treated, but not easily. She needed surgery, long-term monitoring, and time she did not believe she had. She wrote that she panicked, not because she thought she would die, because the diagnosis was found while the hospital was running tests for something else. A pregnancy. I lowered the letter. Noelle was pregnant? Miriam nodded once. My hands went cold. How far along? Almost 11 weeks when she left. The conference room seemed to tilt. For 5 years, I had tried to understand how Noelle could leave our wedding dress hanging in the closet and disappear without looking back. Now there had been a child inside the story, too. I stared at Miriam. Was it mine? She did not answer immediately. That was the moment I knew the next page was going to hurt more. I forced myself to keep reading. Noelle wrote that the baby was mine. She had taken 3 tests before the Wilmington trip and planned to tell me after the wedding license appointment. She had even photographed the first test on the bathroom counter because that was how she understood important things, through a lens. The photograph was in the box. I found it beneath the stack of film, a white test resting beside her silver watch. 2 pink lines. The date stamp was 6 days before she disappeared. I sat back. I had spent 5 years believing she left because she did not want a life with me. She had left carrying the beginning of one. "Where is the child?" I asked. Miriam's face changed. Not much. Enough. I looked back at the letter. Noelle wrote that she did not leave because of the heart condition. That was only the story her parents were allowed to tell if anyone ever found her. The real reason had a name. Gideon Mercer, Noelle's older brother. I had met him twice. Once at Christmas. Once at a family funeral. He was 12 years older than Noelle, broad-shouldered, charming, and always slightly too familiar with everyone in the room. He called me engineer instead of Caleb and slapped my back hard enough to make it feel like a warning. Noelle rarely spoke about him. When I asked why, she said they had different values. That phrase turned out to be carrying more weight than I understood. According to the letter, Gideon had been using Noelle's identity and photography business for years. He opened credit accounts in her name, used her tax information to apply for business loans, moved money through client deposits. When she confronted him, he cried, apologized, and said he was trying to keep his construction company alive. Then he did it again and again. By the time Noelle and I got engaged, the hidden debt was more than $90,000. She had started paying it down quietly because Gideon threatened to expose her as the person responsible. He had her signatures, Miriam said. Some real, some copied, enough to make the situation complicated. I looked at her. Why didn't she come to me? Miriam did not defend her. She was ashamed. I laughed once, a dry sound. She disappeared and let me think she was sleeping with someone else because she was ashamed? She also believed Gideon would come after you. I looked back at the letter. Noelle wrote that Gideon knew where I worked, where my parents lived, and which engineering contracts my firm was pursuing. He had already contacted one of my clients anonymously, suggesting I had helped falsify inspection documents on an old renovation project. The accusation was false, but in my profession, false accusations still left stains. Noelle believed that if she married me, Gideon would gain access to our finances and use me as leverage. She planned to gather proof first. Then she discovered she was pregnant. She became more frightened, not less. Gideon had one final demand. Leave Raleigh, cut contact with me. Keep paying. Or he would tell me the debt was mine too, send the forged documents to my employer, and report her for financial fraud. Noelle believed disappearing would protect me. It was a terrible decision. She admitted that in the letter. I thought distance was the same thing as safety. I was wrong. I only gave him more control. I stopped reading. Where did she go? Savannah first, Miriam said. Then Knoxville. Then a town outside Roanoke. Did she have the baby? Miriam reached into the box. She removed a small photograph and placed it in front of me. Noelle was sitting in a hospital bed. Her hair was tied back. Her face looked exhausted. In her arms was a newborn wrapped in a gray blanket. I could not move. The baby had one hand pressed against Noelle's chest. On the back, she had written, Mara, born February 18th, 7 pounds, 1 ounce, Caleb's eyes. I read the name twice. Mara, my daughter had a name. I looked up. Where is she? Miriam's expression broke slightly. She died at 4 months. The words did not enter me all at once. They came slowly, like cold moving through a room. Miriam explained that Mara was born with the same heart defect, but more severe. She survived 1 surgery. A second was planned. She did not make it that far. Noelle buried her in a small cemetery outside Roanoke. Only Darlene and Noelle's father attended. No one told me. I pressed both hands against the table because I felt as though I might fall through it. I had missed the pregnancy, the birth, the hospital, the funeral, everything. All because Noelle decided I was safer not knowing. For 5 years, I thought I had been abandoned. Now I learned I had also been made into a grieving father without being given the grief. I looked at Miriam. She had no right. No, she said quietly. She didn't. That answer mattered, not because it helped, because it was the first honest thing anyone had said about Noelle's choice. I turned to the final page. Noelle wrote that after Mara died, she stopped trying to return. She could not face me. She could not admit that the life she had tried to protect was already gone. Gideon kept taking money, kept threatening her, and by then, he was no longer only hiding debt. He was hiding what really happened the night Mara died. The letter ended with one line. The camera contains the photograph that proves my brother was at the hospital, even though he swore he never came near us. I looked at the old camera in the box. Miriam slid a memory card across the table. There are 112 images on this, she said. Most are ordinary. And the others? She met my eyes. One of them may explain why Noelle spent the last 5 years afraid of the wrong secret. I didn't look at the memory card until I got home. Not because I was afraid of what I might find. Because I already knew nothing inside it could give me back the 5 years I had lost. Or the daughter I never held. The box sat on my kitchen table until almost midnight. For an hour I walked around my apartment pretending I had other things to do. I answered emails, watered 2 plants, started the dishwasher. Anything except opening the laptop. Finally, I inserted the memory card. 112 photographs. The first 20 looked ordinary. Empty roads, rain against motel windows, coffee cups, old churches, abandoned gas stations. They were unmistakably Noelle's work, even in hiding. She never stopped seeing beauty in forgotten places. The next 30 photographs were of Mara, sleeping, yawning, wrapped in blankets, holding Noelle's finger. One picture showed tiny footprints covered in blue hospital ink. Another captured Mara looking directly into the camera. I stared at that photograph for almost 10 minutes. Her eyes looked exactly like mine. For years I wondered whether becoming a father would have changed me. Now I knew. It already had. I just hadn't been allowed to live it. Near the end of the gallery, the timestamps changed. Hospital, Roanoke Regional Medical Center. The day Mara died. Noelle had taken photographs even there. Not artistic ones, documentary ones, like she was collecting evidence. Hallways, waiting rooms, medical charts, her overnight bag, a clock on the wall. Every image had a purpose. Then, photo 108. I opened it. My breath caught immediately. It showed Noelle sitting beside Mara's hospital bed. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking toward the doorway. Standing in that doorway was Gideon. He wasn't visiting. He wasn't comforting her. He looked angry. His finger pointed toward Noelle. His mouth was open as if he were shouting. The timestamp read, 9:14 p.m., according to Noelle's letter. Gideon had always claimed he never came to the hospital. He told their parents he was 300 miles away that night. The photograph proved he lied. Photo 109. Gideon was closer now. Still arguing, Noelle had stepped backward. One arm protected Mara's crib. The other still held the camera. Photo 110. Everything changed. The picture was blurred, as though the camera had been knocked sideways. One corner captured Gideon's arm reaching forward. Another showed a nurse rushing toward the room. Photo 111. The camera pointed at the floor. A broken coffee cup. Medical gloves. Someone's shoes. A hospital bracelet. Nothing made sense. Photo 112. Black. No image. Only a timestamp. 9:18 p.m., then the memory card ended. I immediately called Miriam. She answered even though it was after midnight. I found the photographs. I expected you would. What happened after that? Silence. I don't know. You don't? Noelle refused to talk about those 4 minutes. 4 minutes? Between the last photograph and Mara's medical emergency. My stomach tightened. What are you saying? I'm saying the timeline never made sense. The next morning I drove to Roanoke. Not because I knew what I was looking for, because sitting still had become impossible. Roanoke Regional had changed over the years. New entrance, different parking garage, fresh paint. Only the children's wing looked familiar from Noelle's pictures. At the reception desk, I explained who I was. The administrator listened quietly. I'm sorry for your loss. I need records. She shook her head gently. Most medical records are protected. I expected that. Then she added, there is someone you may want to speak with. 20 minutes later, an older nurse walked into the conference room. Her name tag read, Linda Cross. The moment she heard Mara's name, her expression changed. I remember them. You do? She nodded slowly. The photographer. My throat tightened. And the baby. Linda looked out the window before speaking. I've thought about that family more times than you can imagine. Why? She took a deep breath. Because that night shouldn't have happened. She remembered Gideon perfectly. He wasn't supposed to be there. What do you mean? He wasn't listed as family. He demanded access anyway. Linda explained that Gideon argued with Noel for nearly 15 minutes in the hallway. Security was called before they arrived. He entered Mara's room. Did he touch the baby? Linda hesitated. She stopped. I never actually saw him. You just said, I saw him leave. Everything inside me froze. What? Linda looked directly at me. I left the room to call security. When I came back, Mara's monitor was alarming. What about Gideon? He was already gone. I felt my pulse pounding. Are you saying? She quickly shook her head. I'm not accusing anyone. But? There was one detail I've never forgotten. What? Linda closed her eyes for a second. When we checked Mara's IV line, she swallowed. It had been disconnected. The room became completely silent. Accidentally? Linda looked down. We documented it that way. And now? She met my eyes. I've never believed it was accidental. I could barely speak. Why wasn't it investigated? Linda sighed. There wasn't enough evidence. The hospital settled on equipment failure. But the staff? She nodded slowly. Many of us weren't convinced. As I stood to leave, Linda called my name. There was something else. I turned around. She walked to an old filing cabinet, opened one drawer, removed a thin envelope. I shouldn't still have this. Inside was a visitor log. Every person who entered the pediatric unit that night had signed in, except one. Gideon's name appeared. Then a single line crossed through it, as if someone had tried to erase the fact that he'd ever been there. Linda whispered, I made a copy before the original disappeared. I stared at the paper. Someone hadn't just hidden the truth from me. Someone had hidden it from everyone. And for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't trying to understand why Noel left. I was trying to understand what really happened during those missing 4 minutes. I barely slept after leaving the hospital. The visitor log sat on the passenger seat the entire drive back to Charlotte. Every red light, every mile, every quiet stretch of highway brought the same question back. Why would someone erase Gideon's name? If Mara's death had truly been a tragic medical accident, there would have been nothing to hide. The next morning, I called Miriam. I want to confront Gideon. She was quiet for several seconds. I expected you would. Where is he? Phoenix. He moved there 3 years ago. What does he do? Nothing stable. She hesitated. Caleb. What? He's dying. The sentence surprised me more than I expected. Liver failure. Doctors don't expect him to live much longer. 3 days later, I flew to Arizona. Not because I wanted revenge. Revenge had stopped meaning anything after I learned about Mara. I wanted one thing. The truth. Gideon lived alone in a small rented duplex on the edge of the city. Nothing about him resembled the man I remembered. He looked 20 years older. His hands shook. His face was pale. When he opened the door and saw me, he didn't look surprised. He simply whispered, I wondered how long it would take. I didn't sit down. Neither did he. For a while, we simply looked at one another. Finally, I placed the visitor log on his kitchen table. You were there. He stared at the paper. I know. You lied. I know. You let me believe Noel abandoned me. His shoulders dropped. I know. I wanted to yell. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. What happened to my daughter? For the first time, Gideon cried. Not dramatically, not loudly, like someone who had rehearsed apologies for years, but never found anyone willing to hear them. He slowly walked to the living room, opened an old wooden cabinet, pulled out a small metal box. Inside were hospital records, court documents, letters, and a voice recorder. I've carried this for 5 years. He placed it on the table. I never had the courage to send it. The recording lasted less than 4 minutes. Noel had secretly turned it on during their argument. The first minute was mostly shouting. Then Gideon's voice became clear. You owe me. No, Noel answered. I'm done. You think marrying him fixes everything? It gives my daughter a chance. Then, a loud crash. Someone screamed for a nurse. The recording became chaotic. Finally, one sentence froze my blood. Gideon shouted, I didn't touch the baby. No one had accused him. Not yet. The words came on their own. I looked at him. You disconnected the IV. He immediately shook his head. No. Then what happened? His voice broke. I grabbed Noelle. She pushed me away. The stand tipped over. The line came loose. I stared at him. You caused it. He nodded. I never meant. He couldn't finish. Hospital staff reconnected Mara's IV within minutes. But the interruption caused complications in a child whose heart was already failing. Doctors documented equipment failure because they couldn't prove otherwise. No criminal charges were filed. No investigation continued. Everyone moved on. Except Noelle. Except Gideon. Except me. I looked around the room. So everything, the debt, the threats, the lies, the disappearing, he nodded slowly. I destroyed her life long before the hospital. Why? He laughed bitterly. I kept believing one more loan would fix everything. It never did. So I borrowed more. And when she tried leaving, I couldn't lose the only person still cleaning up after me. I suddenly understood something that had bothered me for years. Noelle hadn't disappeared because she stopped loving me. She disappeared because she spent her entire life believing she had to rescue the wrong person. By the time she realized she couldn't, she had already lost everything else. Before leaving, I asked Gideon one final question. Why didn't you tell me? He stared out the window. Because every day after Mara died, I told myself tomorrow. He smiled sadly. Eventually, tomorrow became 5 years. He died 6 weeks later. There was no funeral, only a short obituary. I didn't attend. A month after that, Miriam called again. Noelle left one more instruction. What is it? She wanted you to develop the remaining film. Most of the roles contained ordinary moments, sunsets, old bridges, children playing in parks, rain on train windows. Then, the final role, frame 23. I stopped breathing. It was me, standing outside our townhouse, holding a ladder, looking annoyed because she kept asking me to smile. The same photograph I'd carried in my glove compartment for 5 years. Only this time, the frame was wider. Behind me, standing on the sidewalk, was Noelle. One hand resting gently against her stomach. She already knew she was pregnant. She was smiling, not at the camera, at me. She had planned to tell me that evening. Instead, fear changed the rest of our lives. A few months later, I drove to Roanoke. For the first time. Mara's grave was small, simple. No elaborate monument, just a white stone beneath a maple tree. Someone had been placing fresh wildflowers there, every week. The cemetery caretaker smiled when he saw me. "You must be Caleb." I looked at him. "How did you know?" "The young woman told me one day you'd come." I couldn't speak. He handed me a sealed envelope. I promised I'd wait. Inside was the last note Noelle ever wrote. Just 4 lines. "You deserved the truth much sooner. If love means anything, don't spend the rest of your life remembering how I left. Remember how completely I loved you before I was afraid." I folded the letter carefully, placed it back inside the envelope. Then I sat beside my daughter's grave until sunset. For years, I believed grief came from losing the future. I was wrong. Sometimes grief comes from discovering the future actually existed. You were simply never allowed to live it. As the evening grew quiet, I stood up. I touched the smooth edge of Mara's headstone once. Then I walked back toward my truck. Not because the pain was gone, it never would be, but because for the first time in 5 years, there were no more missing pieces, only memories. And finally, the truth.